Hello, and welcome back to Frequently Confused. I'm attaching a disclaimer to this video, and I'll state the obvious. I am not a historian or a scholar. I'm just looking to record and post my opinions on certain topics that interest me and have a dialogue with anybody listening. I'm going to be making several videos on topics such as religion, philosophy, and levels of consciousness as they intersect with my own life. I'll break down my own thought process as I contemplate these topics. Obviously, due to the interpretive nature of these subjects, I am going to get some things wrong. If you catch one of my errors, or if you want to talk to me about anything in particular, I hope that you'll share that with me in the comments. Anyways, let's get into it. Whether you are a devout Catholic or the most skeptical atheist, it can't be denied that we all share the same tendency to believe in the supernatural. Morning prayers, a lucky pair of socks, or even yelling at a broken lawnmower are all evidence of this mutual tie that binds our way of thinking. There is no consensus as to why we are hardwired this way, but it is an innate fact about being human. It was during the approximate year of 100,000 BC that religion was born in the same place humanity first came to be, Africa. Animism, the first ever recorded practice of religion, was the belief that inanimate objects had their own distinct spiritual essence. For accuracy's sake, it must be stated that animism is a general term used by scholars to describe the religious perspectives and practices of numerous cultures. Each of these cultures would observe different mythologies and rituals, but animism is what linked them all together as the foundational thread. The immaterial soul is a key intersection between all religions, including this prototypical one. In this belief structure, trees, rocks, human artwork, even words were all thought to possess their own agency and spiritual essence. In the animist view, there was no real distinction between the material and spiritual world. Again, as animism is only a general term for the religious perspectives of countless cultures, there is no one consensus on their view of death. But all animist cultures seem to share a belief in some form of the afterlife, the continuity of consciousness, with some believing that when you die, your soul would leave your body to animate other things such as animals, plants, or even other humans. People are social creatures, and as such, they congregated and formed themselves into small hunter-gatherer tribes that lived off the land. Given that these tribes were small, consisting of less than 100 people, they did not make the large impression on the land that we see today in our sprawling cities. They lacked the technology and manpower to reshape the land, and as such, they were required to live in harmony with their environment. These animists had respect and reverence for the world around them. They existed as a small part of the ecosystem. Human likeness was not necessarily a prerequisite for personhood. Many of these groups viewed animals as though they were merely other people. This notion can be found in a much more recent example of animist culture in the Ojibwe communities, located in southern Canada during the mid-19th century. This group believed that entities such as rocks, wolves, and plants were each willful beings who found power and meaning through their interactions with others. Humans belonging to these cultures didn't view themselves as distinct from other beings as people do today. Being merely one piece of the greater world, they understood that they had no more claim to anything than that of the other animals they cohabitated with. Humans were fruitful, and their populations grew and people spread across the continent and eventually the globe. Different factions of people traveled to different areas. Some clung to the old way of life, but others chose a different path. Their populations swelled until the land could no longer support them as their only food source. People transitioned from hunter-gatherer tribes to agricultural societies. As their technologies advanced, they shifted their focus from foraging and hunting to farming. The nomadic lifestyle was traded in for a more sedentary one, as people worked together to feed their increasingly large communities. Living in a fixed location brought about new challenges and required a heavier emphasis on building homes and organizing themselves so that unity could be achieved. In general, these early societies were successful in their endeavors. As time passed, people continued to spread across the earth and replicate this success. By then, these people had begun to have fewer encounters with the natural world. For many, most of their lives now consisted of interactions with only each other, excluding livestock and pets. Of course, people still hunted in nature as a source of food, but by then they had organized themselves into hierarchies and different social structures based on class and skill. Production and procurement of food for the whole community became a sole focus for a percentage of the population, as different subgroups were responsible for different needs, including governance. It was in Mesopotamia where one of the first civilizations was established. The Mesopotamian culture known as Sumeria was the birthplace of a new form of religion, polytheism. Polytheism generally was the belief in multiple gods. Sumerians believed that our universe came to be through a series of births. The primeval waters Namu created the sky Ki and the earth An, who together in turn produced a son known as Enlil, god of wind and storms. He was said to have separated heaven from earth, and just like a son who has grown up and set out on his own path, he claimed the newly separated earth as his own domain. Later, humans were in turn created by the god Enki, son of Namu and An. Heaven was reserved for the gods alone, so when people died, they believed that their immortal souls, regardless of their actions in life, would travel to Kur, a dark, cavernous place beneath the earth, where they lived in eternal darkness and the only food available was dust. Like with animism, the Sumerian mythos served a purpose for their people. It explained through stories how the world was created, natural phenomena, and how they could find some control in their lives by praying to the right god. People were successful in building their own private world away from the rest of the world, and as a result, they began to view themselves apart from the other animals. This is reflected in their religion, as these gods mentioned before were all described as being human-like in their appearance, and this is evidenced in the artwork, like statues and sculptures that depicted their gods. This is a notable distinction and departure from the pure animist beliefs, as there was no real reason that God should take the form of a man. It was during this time that people had begun to justify their self-proclaimed elevated status through their success in constructing their civilizations. They began to view themselves as architects of the world, as opposed to merely the architects of their own cities. The concept of the immaterial soul is still present through this transition, but I do believe as humans began to dissociate themselves from other animals, this opened the path to anthropocentrism. This idea is taken further still when observing Greek polytheism. Greece was the birthplace of democracy and Western civilization, and was advanced as most ancient civilizations go. During their time, estimated around 1000 BC, Greeks enjoyed indoor plumbing, intricate heating systems, and their feats in architecture are still impressive to this day. Greece was also home to the most popular polytheistic religion ever conceived, Greek mythology. Like most religions, the Greek mythos had its own story of creation. Just like the Sumerians, the Greeks believed that the universe was created through the birth of new gods. According to the Greek mythos, the universe was once an empty void which they referred to as chaos, and from this chaos, Gaia, Mother Earth, was born. Through her own innate fertility, she birthed Uranus, the sky, and Pontus, the oceans. Together, Gaia and Uranus bore 12 children known as the Titans, in addition to monsters known as the Cyclops and the Hecatoncheires. Uranus was disgusted by the monsters and imprisoned them in the underworld. Gaia was angered by the imprisonment of her children and used her son Kronos to defeat and overthrow Uranus. Kronos then married his sister Rhea, and they went on to birth the new gods. Kronos, fearing the prophecy that one day his children would overthrow him as he did his own father, swallowed the children that Rhea birthed, all but the youngest, Zeus. Zeus, raised in secret, grew up and fulfilled the prophecy by poisoning Kronos. After Kronos had vomited up Zeus's siblings, they waged a war against the Titans and were victorious. Zeus slashed Kronos to pieces and scattered him across the underworld, and then Zeus became the leader of the new pantheon of gods. There were numerous other stories included in the lore. Stories about Zeus's unfaithfulness, Hera's jealousy, and Ares' wrath. Through the lens of Greek mythology, we see the concept of anthropocentrism further exemplified as civilization advanced. These gods, just like those envisioned by the Sumerians that preceded them, all took the form of human beings. The lore described in the Greek mythos is undeniably a story of human affairs. Written like an HBO drama, sons rebel against their fathers, husbands incessantly cheat on their wives, and illegitimate children jump through the hoops to prove themselves worthy to join the family business. Polytheism is a general term for the belief in multiple gods. These gods may represent different things amongst different cultures, like the forces of nature or ancestral principles, but as we further sequestered ourselves from the world, our focus pivoted away from the forces that act on the world as a whole to merely the forces that act on man, and narrowing the focus further still onto the different aspects of human nature in general, such as Aphrodite being the goddess of love and beauty, and Ares, god of war, rage, and violence. Greek mythology was a central pillar for the people's history and culture. It explained natural phenomena, where they came from, but more importantly, it gave the Greek people a source of identity. The gods were by no means perfect. They suffered from the same faults that people deal with today, and this is critical because it shows how the Greek people were able to relate to their gods in the first place. People are oftentimes governed by their base desires and fears, which influence their reasoning. Typically, it is considered unwise to act based on emotion, but with these stories centered at the heart of Greek culture, people had justification for what they may have considered righteous with the given context. The Greek gods were intrinsically riddled with faults and weaknesses, and with that in mind, it's easy to see that only humans could be the benefactors to such a disposition. There is some debate as to where the first appearance of monotheism can be found. Monotheism is the belief in one true God. This concept is commonplace in the modern world today, as it has become the most common religious belief structure, namely in the West. But when this new form of religion was initially developed, it was revolutionary. Most people credit the Jewish people for developing the first monotheistic religion, but there was one that preceded it: Zoroastrianism. Described as one of the oldest surviving religions, it is believed by historians that Zoroastrianism was developed over 3,500 years ago, sometime around 1500 BC. Adapted from the ancient polytheistic Indo-Iranian religion that preceded it, Zarathustra was said to have been shown this religion by the supreme being of the universe, Ahura Mazda, who appeared before him as a being of pure light. Ahura Mazda is said to have been supported by 6 divine lesser beings known as the Amesh Spenta. Ahura Mazda was said to be the creator of the universe and was responsible for all good in the world. Opposing Ahura Mazda was Angra Mainyu, a destructive, malicious entity that represented evil in the world. Zoroastrians believe Angra Mainyu was responsible for the litany of life's negative aspects, such as disease, corrosion, and death. At some point, the two deities were separated by a great void. Ahura Mazda lived in a realm of endless light, and Angra Mainyu in endless darkness. Then, Ahura Mazda created the physical world, and Angra Mainyu infiltrated that world and brought suffering with it. Zoroastrianism's main focus is the profound contrast between good and evil. Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu represent the polar opposites of the world, and Zoroastrians believe that through their good thoughts and actions, they can assist Ahura Mazda in defeating Angra Mainyu and purging him from the world. And as an incentive, Zoroastrians also believe in an afterlife, which was determined through the actions made by the living on Earth. When a person dies, their soul leaves their bodies, and they find themselves at a bridge where the path forks between heaven and hell. Zoroaster was said to have seen much suffering and immorality in his time, and wanted to build a better world for the people to live in. This is obvious when we look upon his work, as this belief system was designed to bring harmony to its followers as well as the stranger who may visit the land. Its objective center is on mankind, and the choices we make which will help determine where we stand in the battle between good and evil. As I said before, there is no definitive answer as to whether or not Zoroastrianism was truly the first example of a monotheistic religion. Scholars and historians will debate Zoroastrianism's mono, poly, dual, and even pantheistic nature, but what is undeniable is the stark and obvious impression it made on the major monotheistic religions that followed it and dominate the world today. The Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all possess similar core concepts borrowed from Zoroastrianism, hence why I felt it important to mention it before. There is but one all-powerful God, the dichotomy between right and wrong, a moral code that dictates how people should treat one another, and the role that free will plays in determining our fate in the afterlife. And with these core tenets, these religions continue to follow the same trend that we discussed before: anthropocentrism, the concept that human beings are the most important beings on Earth, that people alone are the only creatures that hold any intrinsic value. God was said to have stocked the lands with different flora and fauna, but he happened to take a special interest in man, forming Adam and Eve with noted care and shaping them in his own image. Fortunate that he did, as we are the only creatures who would end up reading and interpreting Holy Scripture. At best, animals are treated with mercy, as man enjoys a separate class distinct from animals in the Abrahamic religions, with a notable line stating that man was given dominion over the birds in the skies, fish in the seas, and the wild animals that inhabit the lands. But knowing this, our focus has narrowed into the myopic worldview that many people hold today. Most of industrialized society doesn't even have to interact with nature while in the midst of crowded, concrete cityscapes, and those that do it out of a desire for sporadic recreation. People bound by modern life self-report increasing levels of depression due to the sheer monotony of it all. The forests, jungles, and safaris are purged to make way for more farmland, residential, and industrial areas to support our ever-growing populations. Truly, I feel that when people are asked to consider the decisions that will affect the whole world, this world we imagine only exists within the scope of our city limits, with animal kind being merely an afterthought. If the power went out and we had to abandon our modern lifestyles, it would be described as the end of the world, when in fact the planet itself would probably be better off for it. Religion, namely the story of God, is truly an allegory for man itself. Historically, people have used these stories to make sense of their worlds by providing explanations for their origins, the meaning of life, identity, and the right and wrong way to live. And as man's way has changed, his worldview has changed subsequently. And these ever-evolving religions are evidence of that. We used to belong as a small part of the ecosystem, but as we congregated, frenetically multiplied, and worked on our gadgets and walls, we gave ourselves too much credit and moved along with a seemingly justified sense of ownership. We successfully separated ourselves from nature, and now we view ourselves as the architect of the new world we built to live in. Our technology evolved, and we grew to be more sophisticated over time, but human nature itself hasn't changed. We still cling to our own irrational beliefs in appealing to the supernatural, even if in more trivial ways. Even now, as I write this in the West, there is a fervent expanse occurring in the atheist movement. They believe we are too mature now to believe in stories without sufficient evidence, relying upon science to divine the new direction that we should move towards, failing to acknowledge the fact that science is only a tool that we can use. And as generations of previously devout families become more nominal believers of the religious precepts, they are imparted with a new sense of meaninglessness and futility in their lives, which will fester and eventually ripen into nihilism. I'm not advocating that we throw away our smartphones and stop mowing our lawns. I am not a Jainist who may argue that to kill anything for our own good is wrong, as I am acutely aware that something has to die every day so that I can live. All I'm trying to say is that I believe we may have taken the wrong turn somewhere down the line. The animists respected their environment, as they intuited that balance must be achieved in order for all life to flourish. This belief was a reflection of their worldview, and when taking into account the religions that followed it, including the dominant faiths of today, it appears that we have become solely focused on ourselves, their primary guidance being on how we ought to treat one another, advocating justice, charity, and righteous moral actions with hardly a thought to anything else. I'm not saying that these aren't good things to have, as they are, but for me personally, it largely goes without saying. What is important to be cognizant of is that life, even life without man, is still life. We are here to add what we can to life, not just get what we can from it. But I'm just sharing some of my own personal thoughts here. As I said before, I'm just trying to have a dialogue about these things. I couldn't tell you an immediate solution for anything, including our looming population problems. Honestly, I had higher hopes for COVID.